right to your door. Just visit GetRoman.com, chat with the U.S. licensed physician. You'll get FDA-approved medication delivered in discreet packaging. Roman, let's take care of it. Get your first month free at GetRoman.com/TV.
Here again is the touchdown catch. Fields is in a position to pick it. He really is. But as you stated, I'm holding the ball.
All right, everyone. Texas has just scored in the final 21 seconds of the game in Lubbock to take a 41-34 lead. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, coming your way with a late night Saturday night wrap-up of Week 11 in college football. Of course, our games tonight involve Georgia winning big over Auburn after giving up an early touchdown. We had, of course, the Clemson win over Boston College to wrap up the ACC Atlantic Division. This game, Texas and Texas Tech, which will factor heavily into the Big 12 standings. Florida State going to Notre Dame, and the Irish win easily there at 42-13. The last score I had with just a few minutes left to play. Again, Texas and Texas Tech also in play. In the ACC, Georgia Tech, a meaningless win in terms of championships and division races over Miami, but it basically eliminates the Hurricanes with a 27-21 win. Of course, we had games at noon, 3:30, and throughout the day, so we'll talk them all up with a focus on tonight's games. We got Mike McDaniel from ESPN Blacksburg going to join us very soon on, in particular, the ACC and what's going on with the Clemson win and the continued chaos in the ACC Coastal Division, although much like Northwestern, with the ugly overall record, clinching the Big Ten Western Division with a win at Kinnick Stadium, somewhere where a lot of teams have had difficulty winning in recent years, i.e. Ohio State, Michigan, and others. Northwestern goes to Iowa. They win 14-10 with a lot of injuries and a lot of issues. Both field goal kickers down for the Wildcats that limited them immensely and cost them a number of times in the red zone, but they still found a way to win, force a turnover when Iowa was possessed the football with a chance to win the game. 14-10. Northwestern has wrapped up the Big Ten Western Division. They will go to Indianapolis regardless of what happens the last 2 weeks of the season because of the Purdue loss to Minnesota, because of Penn State beating Wisconsin, and their own win head-to-head against Iowa. Yes, Northwestern could lose the last 2 games of the season, finish 6-6 overall, and go to the Big Ten Championship, where they are headed against the winner of the Ohio State-Michigan game, unless the Buckeyes lose to Maryland next week. We also, of course, had that Buckeyes win against Michigan State earlier in the day. Big win by Pitt over Virginia Tech, scoring 52 points in that game and taking control of the ACC Coastal Division, now 5-1 on the season. A number of media contributors may jump on tonight. We'll see if anybody stops by. They've got the link on Twitter. Don't know if anybody's going to see it, but they're welcome to stop by. And, of course, the best chat room in college football as you guys talk it up on the line. So I'll check out the chat room. Of course, the lines are open at 860-325-3687, 860-325-3687. Of course, in that 3:30 window as well, Alabama for a second consecutive week made an SEC offense, not a great offense, but a capable offense with some playmakers, look not average, not marginal, just look completely incompetent, winning 24-0. The Mississippi State defense, unfortunately, took the first 2 drives off. They didn't show up right from the opening whistle from the kickoff. They gave up a 73-yard drive and an 83-yard drive, and it looked like we were going to see like a 52-0 game. But Mississippi State's defense, which is one of the very best in the nation, especially with Simmons and Sweat and Gay up front and Green, they have a top 5, no question, a top 5 defensive line. And after those first 2 drives, they held Alabama under 350 yards of total offense, 156 in the first 2 drives, to stay relatively in the game. If their offense had a pulse, could have done anything, could have capitalized on the couple times that they did drive the ball, especially at the end of the first half when they went all the way down to the 1-yard line and came away with no points, then maybe we would have had some semblance of a game. But it was all taken care of in the first 2 drives for Alabama, scoring, driving all the way down the field, putting points on the board with 2 touchdowns, 14-0 right out of the gate. And Alabama, of course, won 24-0. There were also some bad beats out there. So if you have your own personal bad beat, I'll take that story. But 2 games come to mind. As I mentioned, Alabama and Mississippi State. That point spread fluctuated anywhere from about 22.5 to 25 this week. And Alabama led 24-0 and had the ball driving into the end zone late in the game. And they got stopped on 4th down at the 1-yard line. LSU and Arkansas. LSU had control of that game throughout. They led by as many as 24-3. They gave up 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns as a 12-point favorite to make it 24-17. And then LSU got a turnover. They went down the field. They were at the Arkansas 1-yard line. Nick Brissett carried it twice inside the 5. And LSU ran out the clock at the 1-yard line. So if you took LSU and needed them to cover the points, you needed that touchdown. Of course, they were a 12-point favorite. They won by 7. If you had Arkansas on the points, you are on your knees thanking other powers that be, possibly. So it's all a bit of a guessing game for all of us when it comes down to those kind of situations. I believe I had a pretty good day picking these games. I have not looked at it recently, but I was 8-5 against the spread at one point, and I've picked most of these night games correctly. I don't know the final score in the Clemson-BC game. It was 27-7 with about 4 minutes left, but Clemson was driving, so they might have tacked on another TD. Calling up the live chat here. So we can go back to our bucket of questions that we served up before the weekend's play started, which was who can beat Alabama. So after you saw Georgia tonight, Notre Dame tonight, Michigan playing today in an inconsequential game and trying to continue to measure and evaluate their worth, anybody's going to beat Rutgers by 35 points. Oklahoma escaping Oklahoma State, who's not been a very good team. They've had a couple nice performances in spots. Of course, they beat Texas at home a couple Saturday nights ago, but Oklahoma State's a marginal team at 5-5, and they took Oklahoma to the wire, and with nothing to lose, went for the 2-point conversion after they scored what would have been the game-tying touchdown because they had missed the extra point the previous touchdown, and Oklahoma escapes 48-47. The conventional thinking is Clemson is the primary contender to knock off Alabama. Georgia would be second, Michigan third, and some people, like one particular caller the other night, really likes Oklahoma because of the style of play and because of the ability to play non-Alabama football, where LSU failed miserably a couple weeks ago playing Alabama-style football. Michigan would generally do the same and play right into the bully's hands. Georgia to a certain extent, Notre Dame to a certain extent, that Oklahoma would be much like the wild card. And of course, they came within that much of beating a really good Georgia team at the Rose Bowl last year to go to the national championship game. We really only have one other Power 5 game being played tonight, and if you care about conference races, it's big. Cal at USC at the Coliseum. So that game is going on right now. They kicked off just a few minutes ago. Actually, they've kicked off about an hour ago. I don't know what's going on in that game with Cal taking on USC at the Coliseum. Let me call up the live chat and see what you guys have going. Again, the number is 860-325-3687. It's 860-325-3687. Some of the shenanigans that went on last night causes me to let all of you know who are legitimate callers that maybe you're hesitant to call because then I would have your phone number. That's not the case. And that's one of the reasons why I can't block someone, is that I don't know what your phone number is, just like you don't know what my phone number is. My phone number, believe it or not, is not 860-325-3687. That's a phony, fake number that filters the calls. Therefore, you don't know what my phone number is, and I don't know what your phone number is. That's just a phantom phone number that filters the calls and transfers it to my real line. And therefore, I don't know your phone number either. I just get the call in from 860-325-3687. So if anybody has any hesitancy about calling in because you don't want me to have your phone number, don't worry about that. All right, let's call up the live chat. Earlier in the day, after taking in Michigan State and Ohio State with the Buckeyes winning 26-6, I cut an instant analysis video. Check that out. That's the only video I've cut. Unless I have really good suggestions from you, what I believe I'm going to do over the next couple of days is I'm going to look at all the contenders, both for the college football playoff, and outline their scenario, their situation, and what they need to do going forward, whether they hold destiny in their hands or whether they need some help. I'm also going to go through the various conference races and size it up. We don't need to size it up in the Big Ten Western Division. Northwestern is the winner. Believe it or not, this team could lose to Minnesota and Illinois, the dredge of the Big Ten. They could lose to those two teams over the next 2 weeks, and at 6-6, they will go to the Big Ten Championship because they are now 6-1 in the league. And even though they lose those two games, they have all the tiebreakers because they won all the important games. They beat Wisconsin head-to-head, Iowa head-to-head, and Purdue head-to-head. So Northwestern is your rep from the Big Ten Western Division to go to the Big Ten title game. All right, what do we got here? Got Terry Ann off the top. Hello, everyone. Roll Tide. Sorry for the wait. Did I make you wait? I know I threw out an 11:15 notification. Maybe I squeezed it past about 11:19 or 20. My apologies. College football talk on the line. Ruth Harper. And as I like to mention, and everybody that's been on the line a number of times probably gets tired of me saying this, but I like to welcome the new people. So if I have yet to see your handle in any of the comments or the live chat, I'm going to call you out and just ask, who do you root for and how long you've been watching? So Ruth Harper's on the line. Congratulations, Uncle Lou, on your team's win. West Virginia fan here. Congratulations to West Virginia on your win over TCU. Ruth, you're the best, Mark. Enjoy your channel so much. Ruth, thank you so much. I appreciate that. So you're a West Virginia fan, and we've got a call coming in. So you long-timers and supporters, help me out here. Let's see if we can identify things if we need to. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, Mark Rogers. This is Chris from California. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing just fine. What's up?
Hey, man, nothing. Just my girlfriend's taking over the TV, so I can't watch any more games.
Uh-oh.
You're going to call in. I'm going, yeah, you know, it's all right. I can watch them all day.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, so, dude, I saw your Buckeyes had a good game. So I actually bet Michigan State, and I had a kind of a bad feeling about it. And the Buckeyes, dude, they almost remind me of the Miami team last year where they're almost losing a lot, but they pull it out late. You know what I'm talking about? But I think they're better, dude. I actually think they might beat Michigan. I think they just have it in for them. I don't know.
Well, I think you make a lot of good points. They're playing much like the Miami team. So my next question to you was going to be, before you made the last statement, was whether you thought everything was going to cave in on Ohio State, which wouldn't surprise me. But this Ohio State team, in terms of just sheer talent at all the positions, is better than the 2017 Miami team. That doesn't mean that they couldn't lose to Michigan and then get blitzed in a bowl game and look just as bad down the stretch as Miami did last year. They're capable of doing that because they haven't showed us much against good teams this year and have barely struggled past the likes of Indiana and Minnesota and Nebraska. But yeah, this Ohio State team's better than that Miami team. But yes, Michigan is playing better football. I have been saying that for weeks and weeks and weeks. There's no question. If you do the comparisons between the teams that they both have played, there is no comparison. This is basically the first time Ohio State's played a really strong defensive game. Michigan State helped them out considerably with some big mistakes offensively. But between the special teams helping out the defense, pinning Michigan State deep, I don't know if you caught this in watching the game. There were 5 consecutive possessions in which Ohio State's punt coverage and punting pinned Michigan State inside the 5-yard line. That really helps out a defense.
Yeah, I heard you actually. I watched the game, but I actually heard you talking about that earlier. And you know what, dude? My point is, like, when I said they look like the Miami team or they remind me of them, they do in the sense that everything's close. But I just have a much better feeling about them. Like, I mean, Michigan looks great. They're playing incredible football. But I think there's something that happens in college ball. Or some teams, I don't want to say it's a curse, but like some teams just have the other team's number. Like Ohio State just beats Michigan. You know what I mean? And I don't want to say they're good. You know, they might make the playoffs. I don't know if they're going to win a national championship this year. Like I'm a Georgia fan, and I think the exact same way. Like they look good. You know, Georgia has Alabama looming before anyone else. But my point is, though, I think Ohio State beats Michigan and wins Big Ten.
Okay. You've got to feel good about.
I'll let you go, buddy.
Well, I was just going to ask you about Georgia because considering having to play Florida, that being a close game for 3 quarters, but you guys dominating the 4th quarter, and then after just a few series, for as hyped as Kentucky was and playing so well defensively, for you guys to handle them rather easily, then come back against Auburn here, hold them to 10 points. You've got to feel good coming through a 3-game rough stretch and really handling all 3 games and looking very strong.
Yeah, and you know what? In the beginning of the season, if you look at the scores at the end of the game, like the first 2 cupcake games where they played Middle State, Tennessee, and I don't remember the first like 3 games were just gimme. But then once they played Missouri, they looked real, like they're not playing their potential. It was never looking like, oh, we're going to lose the game, but it was just like, why, we're not scoring touchdowns. Couldn't get past the 10-point lead for the whole, end of the second half. But then, yeah, they get kicked, their ass kicked by LSU, kind of wakes them up. And then the 3 best games of the year right in a row. It's great. Trom's playing good. The defense has kind of fixed the problem. But, yeah, I don't know. As an Ohio State fan, same as Georgia fan, I worry,
Absolutely.
And Alabama's coming up, so, we're not going to beat them. I mean, I don't know. We might, but it's like saying, I'm a Boston College fan. We're going to beat Clemson. Could, but still how that works out.
At least those players have been on the field with Alabama, and they shouldn't be intimidated from the standpoint is that we were on the same field as these guys last year, and we played them to the last play of overtime. So we were just as good as they were. Now, obviously, a lot of those players are no longer with the team, but still, there's still a core of players, especially on offense, that played against this Alabama team. So there's no mystique. There's no mystique, is my point. Like there would be for a team in the college football playoff that had not played Alabama yet.
they play them every, like, just by chance every 2 years or so. Or, you know, they haven't beat them in like 5 or 6 meetings. But, I don't know, dude. It's scary. I mean, it's like we can have such a good season, and then I don't know. I mean, everyone's got to play them now. My feeling is they wait through everyone, but everyone has that hope. Like when Georgia plays with Atlanta, they don't have a good game and they'll show up. I don't know. Can't give up hope on your own team, you know?
That's right. That's why we're fans. Yeah. All right, Chris.
Yeah, all right, dude.
Thanks for the call, man.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks for taking the call.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good luck to your Buckeyes, buddy. I'll cheer from when I watch them.
Very nice. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you later.
All right, buddy. Great. Have a good one.
Got Chris from California. See, I love to discover people that have never contacted me, whether it be over the phone line or in the live chat or in the comments in the videos, but just decide to call and talk. So that's Chris from California. All right, let's go back to the live chat. Eventful day. Again, Ruth, thank you for joining. And I believe you're a West Virginia fan. Yeah, so that game got off to a slow start for the Mountaineers. It took them a while to get going, but once they did, they rolled over TCU. I caught a little bit of that game. It was kind of crowded in that noon time slot with a lot of really good games and important games, and I didn't really fear that West Virginia was going to be challenged by TCU. I picked them to cover the 2 touchdowns in that game, and they won 47-10. So West Virginia rolls on, and we're headed toward that West Virginia-Oklahoma meeting that I'm thinking might get derailed. And it almost happened today with Oklahoma State challenging Oklahoma 48-47, but it hasn't happened, and we're only 2 weeks away. I don't know off the top of my head who Oklahoma or West Virginia plays next week, but of course they both have 1 loss in the conference. Top 10 all 1. Sean Nicholson on the line. Chris is on the line. Buckeye State Sports on the line. Jeff Straley on the line. Buckeyes still struggling, but I see pieces coming together. So what we saw, Jeff, was, of course, the defense play much better against a marginal offense that has trouble throwing the football downfield, especially since they've had Felton Davis go down and some of their other best receiving, I was going to say receivers or receiving threats. I kind of mixed those together. The running game's been non-existent for Michigan State for much of the year to their standards, but it's been better in recent weeks. They had a nice game against Maryland, and they've beaten some good teams, not great teams, teams with flaws and faults, Penn State and others, Purdue. So it's a step in the right direction for Ohio State football. They had about 2 drives in which the passing game was very effective, but otherwise it wasn't. They didn't run the ball well in the first half, but they got Mike Weber loose for 104 yards in the second half against Michigan State's #1 rush defense, which is a legitimate statistic. They may not have the absolute #1 rush defense in America. I would think that would belong to Alabama based on what we've seen the last 2 weeks. But it's definitely one of the top 5 or 10 rushing defenses in America, and Ohio State was actually able to move the line of scrimmage in the second half. They committed themselves to trying to run the ball once they got a lead, and they were able to do so. The defense, again, was helped out tremendously by field position. So that can't be discounted because, yeah, the defense playing the type of offense that Michigan State plays with their lack of explosiveness and having them pin down 5 consecutive possessions inside their own 5-yard line helps out the defense more than you can imagine. But they didn't give up the yardage. They didn't give up the points. They only gave up 6 points, 2 field goals. There was a key play in which Michigan State pulled off a double pass gadget play for a touchdown. That was called back, and that kind of broke their backs. They would have gone up 10-7 in the third quarter. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line? Hey, it's Mark. Who's on the line? Hello, it's Mark. Who's on the line? please call back. All right. Who else is on the chat? Go Vols, baby. So, Hound Dog, it's got to feel good for you as a Vols fan. Got a win over Auburn. You play Kentucky today as an underdog at home. That was one of my upset specials. Tennessee over Kentucky. Winning that game fairly easily. I didn't see any stats, didn't see any highlights. I will check it out. I think I mentioned to you guys each and every Saturday that I try to get to every box score in America, certainly all the Power Fives and all the recaps, and take in all the major highlights of all the games. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Hey, what's up, Mark? It's Sean Nicholson.
Hey, Sean. What's going on?
Hey, not much. Just calling and talking about some Florida football. You know, finally got back into the W column after 2 tough losses. But I was really interested in wondering if you saw Frank Schiff's the Florida crowd today.
No, I did not.
So, you know, the fan base is kind of turned on Frank.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I misunderstood you. Yes, I saw that. So at noon, I had Florida and South Carolina on a screen and was watching you guys just run the ball down their throats, especially in the second half, and come back from 17 down. Yeah, when Frank scored that touchdown, I think to make it, I think it was the first touchdown in the comeback where he ran it in, and then, yeah, he motioned to the crowd and really kind of threw up the finger, not the middle finger, but a finger at the crowd. Yeah, I caught that.
Yeah, I was wondering what you thought about it, because honestly, for me, I've been a proponent of Frank in the Dan Mullen system since Dan Mullen came, and I've been trying to argue in his favor. He hasn't had the best of games, but I feel like he wasn't a liability like he was last year until that second play of the Georgia game on offense when he overthrew Van Jefferson. That's when I officially hopped off the Frank train and was looking for a new QB this game, but Travis got injured, so Frank went back in. And I actually wasn't mad at him for assessing the crowd because I think despite him not, being an elite QB, I don't support booing your home team.
Absolutely.
If you're in the crowd. And so I was pretty excited for him to be able to shush the people who were doing in the crowd today. And for him to fight hard and get a win. But honestly, I'm still ready for it to be the end of the Frank era. I wouldn't mind him being the backup QB moving forward.
Yeah, ever since Tim Tebow stepped off the field for the last time at Florida, you've been searching for a quarterback, and then you had that guy for 6 games a few seasons ago, and of course he's now at West Virginia. But otherwise, you've had to deal with very marginal quarterback play, the Jeff Brantleys, the Jeff Driscolls, on and on and on. And I can't think of the Harris, the kid that played in the 2 SEC championship games in 15 and 16. Yes.
Which honestly, Treon and Driscoll probably would have been better quarterbacks in Mullen's system.
Sure. It's true. So what I thought about Frank's actions was, so I have to put in check my tendency to be old guy, conservative guy, old-fashioned dude that says, don't do stuff like that. But because that's my initial reaction. When I see that, I just cringe and say, what are you doing? But you know what? The kid is not a professional. He's playing college football. He has been selected to be the starting quarterback. It wasn't his decision. He's doing his best. Unless I see whether there's a lack of effort. That aside, unless there is lack of effort there, as long as there is honest effort, which he gives you, yes, he should not be booed by other college students, supporters of the team, alumni, fans of Florida football should not be booing a college kid as long as he is giving his best. That's absolutely ridiculous. Therefore, as a 20-year-old, I had no issue with him responding like that. I should not respond like that if I was faced in the same situation because I'm an adult, completely an adult, versus him. they're emotional. They're playing a football game. It's a high intensity situation. I have no issue with what he did. I can totally understand it. Now, for the kid that's able to refrain from that type of response, I certainly respect that as well. But I don't hold it against Felipe Franks responding to the crowd like that.
All right, and I'm going to leave you with one question before I let you go. So, what happens if Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC championship game? Who all does Alabama still get into the playoffs over? So we're talking about a one-loss Ohio State Big Ten champ, or one-loss Michigan Big Ten champ, or the team with the Big 12 champion, either West Virginia or who the other team is still OU.
Yeah.
Who gets in? Does that one-loss Alabama team get in, or does one of those champions get in over?
So are you asking what I would do, or are you asking what's going to happen?
Both, actually. What do you think, and then what do you think the CFP is going to be in?
Okay. I honor the conference championship. I can understand the committee doing what it did last year in awarding Alabama the slot over Ohio State because the Buckeyes had lost 2 games. So that's a conference champion with 2 losses. So they made the decision that I would not have made. I still would have selected Ohio State, but at least I understand because of the better record, 11-1 versus 11-2. But in this case, you would have all one-loss conference champions versus Alabama. So you would have, we're assuming, Clemson's in, Notre Dame's in, Georgia's in. So there's 1 spot, there's 3 teams. I would honor the conference championship. So that's me. I believe that this is going to come down to style points. And so if Alabama loses that game against Georgia, and it's what we would expect to be a 30-27 game, great game, these may be the 2 best teams in the country on the same field, and Michigan's going to have the disadvantage. Let's say they're the team representing the Big Ten. They would have the disadvantage of playing Northwestern, who's going to be like 7-5 in the Big Ten championship game, 8-4 at best. So that's not going to help them. And Oklahoma will probably give up 35 or 40 points in the Big 12 championship game, and probably the week before that to West Virginia. So that's not going to look so great. So I believe the odds are more than 50-50 under those circumstances. If Alabama beats Auburn the way we would expect them to by 3 to 4 touchdowns, and then loses a field goal game against Georgia, that they would select Alabama over certainly Ohio State because of the Purdue loss, and over Oklahoma. Michigan would probably be a tougher decision for them to make because Michigan's been more dominant. And their losses way back in week 1, and it's against an undefeated Notre Dame team on the road. So they've got the most impressive loss. So that would be the most difficult selection for them to make, would be Michigan versus Alabama. But I think Alabama would be given the nod over Oklahoma and certainly over Ohio State. That's what I think they're going to do.
Okay, so you still think Alabama would get it even if Oklahoma won the championship?
If they win in the manner in which they're winning games right now, they just won 48-47. Last week, they played a Texas Tech team that's not that good. They're decent. And they beat them, 52-48 or whatever the score was. So if they continue to just beat teams that are barely in the top 25 or not even close to that by less than a touchdown and give up 45 and 50 points to these teams, they're most likely, unless they just show us a different level of football against West Virginia. And if they beat West Virginia, let's say back-to-back weeks, last game of the regular season, then the Big 12 championship game, and really make a statement that may change their minds, the committee's minds. Otherwise, Oklahoma is again showing us like the 70th rated defense in the country. I may be wrong. You're asking me, obviously, to determine what other people are going to decide. But based on what we saw last year, we know where they're leaning. We know that they believe Alabama is the best team in the country by far. They only dropped LSU from 3 to 7 after losing 29-0. So they gave Alabama that much credit to say, we're not going to penalize LSU that much because it's understandable that they lost by 4 touchdowns in their own stadium to Alabama.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I was just interested in knowing what you thought about that, the whole Frank situation. What Alabama's chances are if they lose this SEC championship game.
Yeah. Then there's the question of what are their odds of losing this championship game?
Yeah, it doesn't look like they're going to have much competition, but I'll give Georgia a puncher's chance as good as anybody else will.
Oh, I do too. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, they would be my second selection to Clemson to play Alabama and beat them. All right, Sean. Yeah, I appreciate it. Have a good one. Sean Nicholson, who's been joining us for quite a long time here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, talking to him for the first time. So that's good to see. We were supposed to have Mike McDaniel on the line from ESPN Blacksburg. I sent him the link. I'm just going to check here real quick to see what may be the issue there. I don't know. So I will text him. Otherwise, I'll take your calls and we'll talk up all the games, and maybe I'll just run through everything that hit me. All right. Yes, Clemson rolled. I'm very anxious to see a final score on Clemson. It was 27-7 with 4 minutes left. And I took BC plus the 20. But Clemson was driving, so I'm not too hopeful about that. Hey, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line? Yeah, who's on the line?
Hi, Mark. This is Terry Ann.
Hi, Terry Ann. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good.
I bet.
I just have to get something off my chest tonight. Those Mississippi State players, the whole game, you could tell that they were deliberately going after Taylor and trying to hurt him. And
yeah.
I just don't understand people that do that, or a coach that would tell their team to do that. Why would you not want to beat a team at their best? I just don't understand that, Mark. Why would they do that?
So I don't know whether Joe Moorhead, the Mississippi State head coach, and his staff is instructing players to do that. I certainly would hope not. But unfortunately, in this day and age, where these players have more freedom and control than they ever have, there are fewer and fewer coaches that feel as though they have the authority and the power to reprimand players. And so they kind of turn a blind eye to that sort of behavior, and they may not necessarily approve of it, but they tolerate it because they want kids to come to their school and play for them, and they know this is the way this type of play is headed, and this is the trend today, and therefore they want to be the guy that accepts that sort of play and lets their players sometimes take it to that degree. That's what I'm guessing. I'm guessing that he did not instruct his players to do that, but he is allowing it. That's a guess.
Well, in my opinion, it's just just a chicken way to play. I mean, I don't understand any team doing that, especially against Alabama. I mean, why in the world would you want to upset Alabama's team? Because if you go after their best player and try to hurt him, do you not think they might not try to retaliate? I mean,
yeah,
it's just stupid to play that way. It's just stupid.
Yeah, it's not honorable, but as you mentioned, it's also stupid, because as soon as that you make that kind of action against somebody else, you better be looking behind your back, because it could be coming your way the very next play. You're right. I believe that there's a jealousy of Alabama football. I think that, not that this doesn't happen, this kind of play happens elsewhere, but I think it's more likely to happen against your team, because there's a level. These athletes are smart, and they go out on a field and they can tell within a handful of plays or a couple series how the game's going to go. And Mississippi State, obviously, defensively, after those first two drives, played extremely well, if you're just talking about the play on the field. But that pretty much sealed the game, those first two drives. And then the Mississippi State defense, as you well know, played better against Alabama than anybody has this year. But they know that their offense was incapable of coming back in that game. And it's almost like, as you could see how they reacted after the final play of the game, in which they, well, not the final play of the game, but the final play of the last Alabama drive, in which they stopped the Tide at the 1 yard line, and they went crazy and started throwing a big celebration like they just won the game. And I credit them for showing that kind of effort when they could have just let Damian Harris run right through them, and the offensive line just knock them out of the way and just give up a touchdown, and not, because it didn't matter. So I applaud their effort playing to the last play of the game and showing pride, and we're going to stop Alabama. We do not want to let them score another touchdown. But just for them to celebrate and act like they did something when they're losing 24-0 seems rather odd to me. I wouldn't want my team acting like that. But I just think there's.
I also give them great credit for not stopping in the game and playing to the last second of the game.
Yeah.
You know, any team that does that, I give them great credit for that, because it is easy to just give up after you get so far behind and you know there's no way you're going to win. It's very easy to just lay down and give up. And so I give them all the credit in the world for playing the way that they did. But I just have such disdain for any team that would deliberately go after one player to try to put them out of the game. It's just not an honorable way to play it. It's very sickening, really.
Mm-hmm.
To me, anyone that would think that way is a sociopath. I mean, I don't know any other way to describe it.
So one of your fellow Alabama fans called last week, I believe this was Reasonable Gump, and asked me what I thought about a comment that had been made by an LSU fan a couple weeks earlier heading into the Alabama game, where that particular fan made a comment that the LSU team was going to knock Tua out of the game and go after his knee. And then I was asked about that type of play and that type of approach to a game. And certainly I can't begin to describe how deplorable I think that type of sportsmanship is, or lack of sportsmanship, I think, again, in this game, I think it's a determination that we can't beat them, therefore we want to injure them. And that's the mentality. It's just the lowest form of lack of sportsmanship, to be trying to hurt someone.
When this all started was when a certain caller, I listen to the Paul Feinbaum show almost every day.
Yeah.
And it started on his show. A caller that's actually a Georgia fan called in and said, "I'll tell LSU how to beat Bama. You need to go after Tua's knee and put him out of the game, and then you will beat Bama." And that's when it all got started, on his show.
Yeah.
And, that's just, I don't understand people like that. I just don't.
Absolutely. So for anybody watching, I just want to make it clear that I didn't hear that out of any one associated with LSU football, that they were going to do that. And I didn't see anything in the game that would lead me to believe, I don't remember seeing anything that would lead me to believe that LSU players were doing that. So this was completely a fan going off, and several fans just, I understand the thought, but it shouldn't be spoken that they are so good and he's their best player and he's the difference in them being really, really, really good and the best team and them being the best team by a ton. And so this would be the only way in which, and obviously he got hurt several weeks ago. So it's a vulnerability for him. And so,
well, I tell you what, I truly think what happened if somebody actually did do that. I think that our defense would step up and play lights out. I think Jalen would, if he gets, you know, he's hurt too. So, you know, if Jalen, I think Jalen could come in and fill in very, very nicely. But I think that our team would just step up and play completely lights out. You know, I think that would be the very wrong thing for any other team to do against Alabama.
Oh, I agree. I agree. And when you say Alabama would step up and play lights out on defense, I don't know how much more lights out they can play, but I totally get your point. I understand what you're saying. It's too bad that with all the good things that sports brings us, that we do have, just like in society, with any, you can bring up any topic, you can bring up any issue in society, and there's obviously a whole lot of people that are trying to do good and benefit and help other people and do the right thing and do the honorable thing. And then there's a small portion of people that, for whatever reason, the way they were raised or weren't raised or whatever has made up their approach to life, are petty and selfish and jealous and don't like to see other people succeed.
That's true. That's so true, Mark. Well, I've appreciated talking to you, Mark, as always, and I'll let you go and listen to the rest of your show.
Thank you, Terry Ann. I appreciate it. You have a great night.
You too. Bye.
That was Terry Ann McWright, Alabama fan, who's now called us for, I believe, the second time this week. So that's good to hear from her. 2KJ's on the line. So is Daniel Wade. So obviously Daniel is a Notre Dame fan who is very happy with the victory tonight against Florida State, in which Notre Dame, I didn't see a whole lot of the game. I saw the first series and the first touchdown to Boykin, and I saw a few other plays here and there, but with more competitive games on, I steered away from Notre Dame, Florida State. That apparently they took care of business. They looked good, and Florida State continues to underachieve and underwhelm considerably. There was a call that was starting to come in. So the thing I will tell you, Daniel, is obviously you're a Notre Dame fan. I would love to know how long you've been watching Mark Rogers TV. So welcome so much to the show.
The call will start at the music.
All right. Who do we have on the line, and what's on your mind?
Yes, this is Chad again, calling again.
Hey, Chad.
Hey, I was going to ask you about the whole the Alabama game today. I was watching them and all the other, like me and a couple of people I know, we called it the de facto semifinals to the SEC championship game. It seems like all four, like Alabama, LSU, Georgia, and then Kentucky lost. The three that won all playing a little bit, I felt sluggish.
The ones that won. How about the ones that lost?
Yeah, Kentucky didn't play too well. I thought it would have been the score would have been the other way around, because I don't really see much from Tennessee to say they were going to beat Kentucky.
Yeah, I somehow had a bit of a hunch on that game, and I did pick Tennessee to win. It wouldn't have been surprising to me, of course, Kentucky being over the long haul the better team, and with arguably the best defense. Well, now that what we've seen out of Alabama, I won't put them in the same category, but one of the very best defenses in the country, in the top 5 or 10, that they go to Tennessee and lose by double digits. is a bit surprising. I thought it would be somewhat of a slugfest in which Tennessee would find some way to win. But LSU, as many predicted as well, had a bit of a hangover, but they did survive at Arkansas 24-17 in that game. But LSU isn't the type team or the type offense and don't have that type of approach to really blow out anybody who's significant. So the score didn't surprise me too much in the LSU camp either.
What about the Georgia-Auburn outcome?
So, yeah, I started watching that game. I saw the first quarter. Then I did something with my daughter, so I didn't see much of the game after that. By the time I got back, it was 27-10. They just scored to go up 27-10, so there was little left to really see that was meaningful at that point. But obviously, Auburn has an issue running the football, and that's magnified against a team as good as Georgia, and had to rely on Jarrett Stidham, who completed a lot of passes, but they didn't go anywhere. I saw his numbers in the second half. He had 56 yards passing on I don't know how many completions. He was completing passes, but they weren't going anywhere. So the Georgia defense is really rounding into form here in the last 3 weeks. And this is the best offense they've faced in those 3 weeks. And to play that well, they're hitting their stride. They seem to have solved a few of their red zone issues that they've been having throughout the season and had in the first half of this game. So that's going to be key against Alabama. They've got to convert touchdowns in the red zone and not settle for field goals. And Jake Fromm is going to have to play a near flawless game.
And I want to ask this, since Kentucky was 11 and was ranked ahead of Central Florida, and Syracuse did win last night,
Mm-hmm.
you think there's any possibility if they move Central Florida from 12 to 11, or do they bump up Syracuse ahead of Central Florida?
So as you know, the committee takes a little different approach than the coaches poll and the AP poll. They take more of the approach that I've always taken, and I deconstruct the season every time I make the top 25. So people sometimes wonder, oh, well, that team was 15 last week and you had another team at 13. How did the number 15 team jump the number 13 team when they both won? Well, that's because I tore down the season and resurrected it again based on the complete resume, and the number 15 team beat a much better team than the number 13 team. So they now have a better resume. So they will do that. They will reconstruct the season and the results. And so Syracuse beat a team that you would expect them to beat. It's the worst team in the ACC. It's one of the very worst teams in the Power Five in Louisville. So it was not a significant win for Syracuse. They did win it decidedly. They manhandled them. Central Florida was not very impressive in today's game against Navy. They let Navy, who just lost 42-0 to Cincinnati last week and came into the game at 2-7. They let them hang around and only beat them by 11. So I would think that Syracuse would have a chance in the rankings to jump at Central Florida.
And I was looking at the SEC standings. South Carolina and Tennessee both have to get a win to be bowl eligible, and I think Tennessee will have the tougher road to get to that 6th win next week with them playing in Missouri.
Yep.
So could be a possibility of the winner of the Tennessee Vandy in the last week for whoever to go to be bowl eligible.
Absolutely, which we talk some Tennessee football with Mike LeBall from Last Word on College Football on a regular basis, and that was his goal for the team this year, was to go 6-6 and get to a bowl game. And we knew that it was going to be kind of a narrow path, that they almost had definite wins on their schedule. They had definite losses. The definite wins were obviously all those easy non-conference games outside of the West Virginia game, and then having to play Alabama and Auburn outside of the division. We figured those would be the 2 losses. But once Tennessee upset Auburn, that opened up some possibilities of them getting to postseason play. So I was just curious to see Tennessee's final 2 games. I'm assuming that would be, Vandy and Kentucky?
Vandy, well, they played Missouri and Vandy.
Oh, that's right. They already played Kentucky. That's who they beat today. I'll pull it together here. Yeah. So they've won 2 games in which
Missouri at home this coming up.
so Tennessee sits at 2-4 in the SEC, 5-5. So yeah, they got to split the 2 games, and they're going to be a significant favorite against Vandy. Where is that game?
Yeah, I don't know if they will be a favorite at home against Missouri though. So.
Well, let's see. I'll take a guess. I'm usually pretty good at this. I look at way too many college football lines. I'm going to guess they're at home against Missouri. Wow. I'm going to guess that they're going to be a 2 or 3 point underdog. And then they have Vandy on the road. I'm going to guess that they're going to be a 6 or 7 point favorite off the top of my head.
And then I got to think about the Iron Bowl because every time Alabama didn't have it crawling. Wow.
Hey, Chad, I think we lost your last comment. You cut out there. So in terms of the Iron Bowl, what was that?
Yeah, in terms of the Iron Bowl, I usually throw the lines out because, like in 2009, I think Alabama was a head favorite, ended up squeaking it out by 6 or something.
Yeah.
And usually, with the exception of 2 of them, with the 2012 and 2008, where Alabama blew out a very bad Auburn team, I don't think it'd be I think maybe a 7 point game or something like that.
You think Alabama's only going to win by a touchdown next week or in 2 weeks?
In 2 weeks. Because that's what usually transpires.
Well, I will hand it to Gus Malzahn and the Auburn Tigers if they can stay within a touchdown. I understand what you're saying about rivalries. I think that's a little overplayed, but I do think that there's truth to rivalry games being different than other games, especially that last weekend of the season. And Auburn's going to be in a situation in which they're going to be 6-5. And well, let's see. No, they're going to be 7-4. I'm sorry. They're going to be 7-4, but basically the game outside of the rivalry is only going to matter to their bowl standing. They're going to either go to the Music City Bowl or the Independence Bowl or the Birmingham Bowl. You know, it really doesn't matter. But beating Alabama obviously would completely make their season. So I think there's something to that. I think we see it in rivalries all over the country, but I think it's a little overplayed. I don't think you can just throw out the records because there's a reason Alabama's going to show up at that game 11-0 and Auburn's 7-4. Auburn's a 7-4 team. They're like roughly the 25th best team in the country, something in that range, and Alabama is by far the best team in the country. So I would expect them to play to that degree. And yes, you can go through history and target a few games here and there that belie the records. And you mentioned the Greg McElroy having to throw a late touchdown against Auburn in 2009 to pull out that game. And yeah, there are certainly other examples of that in all the rivalry games.
And speaking of today's Mississippi State and Alabama game, I looked that up a couple of days ago. That's actually a rivalry game of itself. They call it the I-85 something game. But I think that's more tend towards because both of those schools are big rivals when it comes to college basketball and baseball and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's also the closest school to campus. That's the closest drive. Definitely. I used to make that drive on a regular basis. All right, Chad, anything else on your mind?
I got one more. Has the Heisman race got any closer, or is it just Tua and and whoever.
So, Tua is the best football player in the nation. And again, I always put a bit of a disclaimer on that because linemen aren't going to win the Heisman. So he's the best skill player in the nation. And really nobody's come close to that. Some of the preseason favorites have fallen off, like a Bryce Love has not had a good season at Stanford. So right now, to me, the only guys that would have any shot of challenging his Heisman candidacy would be, okay, Dwayne Haskins at Ohio State has had a tremendous season, but over the last few weeks, his numbers have not been great. Now, if he throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, and they upset Michigan, and it's obvious that he was needed to win that game, they win it 41-40, then that's obviously going to bolster his case, as is Kyler Murray in a duel with Will Grier the last, what should be 2 weeks of the season, the last regular season game, and then the championship game. He would be the other candidate. Outside of those, unless I'm missing somebody, I cannot think of anybody else that I would place in the Heisman race. Because all the quote-unquote best players in college football just haven't had that outstanding of a season, like a Trace McSorley at Penn State has not. And Trevor Lawrence obviously didn't play the first several games of the season. He's got a great TD to interception ratio. But it's Tua's to lose, and I don't see how he can lose it at this point. He's got 2 substantial games to play, and as long as he doesn't tank those games with 3 and 4 interception games, he's going to be the Heisman Trophy winner.
And plus, he's about to break a record if he passes for 3 more touchdowns.
Is that the Alabama single season record?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because McCarron has got it right now with 30.
Yeah, so he's going to break that record. I don't know that Heisman voters are going to take really much note of that in particular, but Dwayne Haskins is most likely going to throw for more touchdowns, but that's because Tua has been taken out of all these games. That's not because Haskins has had a better season. He's thrown 6 interceptions. He's not had nearly as good a season as Tua has. And again, Kyler Murray, he's played extremely well. And the only argument in his camp is that his team has desperately needed him to be that good. Oklahoma would be nowhere near where they are right now without Kyler Murray. If they had an average quarterback, they would be 6-3 right now, or whatever, 6-4. Alabama, if Jalen Hurts was playing, they'd still probably be undefeated right now. It just wouldn't be as impressive. And we'd all be arguing over whether Georgia was going to beat them, and it would be a toss-up. All right, Chad. Thanks for the call. I appreciate it. New callers tonight. In addition to Terry Ann, it was nice to hear from Chad and Chris from California and a few other new callers. All right, GW White 713. Good to have you here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So please let me know who you root for. We got Quentin Gage on the line. Refs stole at least 7 points from Mississippi State. So that was unfortunate. I don't think anyone could really argue that Alabama was not going to win that game if the correct call was made on the Damian Harris fumble at midfield. But we knew Mississippi State was at a huge disadvantage to start the game, and it would have been nice as just somebody like myself that wants to see the right calls made and doesn't want to see something taken away from a particular team, that the right call would have been made. They would have stopped play. They would have reviewed the play. It was close, but I think it was clear on the video that Harris fumbled and Mississippi State would have taken over at the 50. Now, based on the way they played the rest of the game, we would not have expected Mississippi State's offense to do anything with it, but at least it would have extended the closeness of the game staying close, because Mississippi State would have taken over the football, had a chance to do something with it. Maybe they could have driven 15 yards and kicked a field goal, or maybe they would have scored a touchdown. Who knows? Because you can't project or extrapolate from what happened. What happened was Alabama maintained possession, and they went and scored a touchdown and completed the drive. That, to their credit, but they were given the opportunity that they should not have been given. Now, had Alabama scored that last touchdown and won 31-0 instead of 24-0, and since somebody sitting here had Mississippi State in 25 points, then maybe I would have been a little bit more outraged about it. But I can certainly understand the Mississippi State fan, the reasonable Mississippi State fan, saying we wouldn't have won the game, but it would have been nice to have received the proper call. We wouldn't have given up a first drive touchdown. We would have had the ball at midfield. Maybe we stay in the game a little bit longer. Instead of it being 14-0, maybe it would have been 7-3 or 7-0. And momentum would have been on our side a little bit longer. And so maybe we could have stayed in the game. Mississippi State defensively played extremely well. Unfortunately, as Terry Ann and I were talking about, they didn't show up from the kickoff on. They gave up those first two drives. They were in a hole. And because of their offensive inefficiencies and Alabama's great defensive dominance, and maybe the most impressive player that I saw today was Quinnen Williams. Wow. This guy is just throwing offensive linemen that are well-regarded, really good offensive linemen with experience and talent that will have a chance of playing Sunday football, throwing them to the side. And when he's not throwing them to the side, he's finding a gap, and they don't even lay a hand on him. He's that good. All right. It's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who do we have on the line?
Hey, so you've had new callers. This is Bash here, kind of an old caller.
Hey, Bash. What's going on, man?
Not much, just watching a bunch of football and enjoying that too, because trust me, the playoff picture is not locked up. Someone will lose in the top four.
Who would be your guess?
I mean, the obvious guess would be Michigan. I think Michigan, that game is a toss-up with Ohio State, Michigan, but that would be the obvious guess. Notre Dame also still has USC, Syracuse. Even Clemson's not done. Duke and South Carolina aren't supposed to beat them. But, they could possibly give them tough games, maybe pull one out. We've seen upsets in the past with Clemson, and they will probably have a matchup with Pitt in the ACC Championship. And Alabama, of course, has Georgia still on their schedule, so it's not sealed up. And I just know someone's going to end up losing.
Yeah, history would tell us that you're right, that the probabilities are just too high, that even though it looks very nice and neat and cut and dry, that there is going to be an upset somewhere. And I don't necessarily even consider, I know that Michigan's playing so much better than Ohio State, but the Buckeyes being 9-1 and probably, I can't imagine that they're going to lose to Maryland. They show up at 10-1. They're going to be ranked in the top 7 or 6 in the country, something in that range. They're not going to be a substantial underdog against Michigan. And of course, the history is they never lose to Michigan. So a real upset would be one of the other ones that you just named, like the Pitt game against Clemson in the ACC championship game, or, the big one that I think is a highly possible upset, I'm not going to call it probable, Bash, would be the Notre Dame-Syracuse game. I like that selection.
Yeah, that one in New York. I was really impressed with Ohio State, though. They were struggling a little bit offensively, kind of had some blows through the air. They had a little bit of chunk plays, but couldn't really sustain a drive. So when the defense stepped up, I get Michigan State's banged up, but they did get Cody White back, even though they don't have Felton Davis.
Yep.
They did get Cody White back, and they had Hayward, who just ran all over. They had last week, I can't remember.
Maryland.
Michigan State. Maryland, yeah, okay. They ran all over for what that's worth. So, Hayward was on a hot streak there for a little while, for that game, and Rocky Lombardi also looked good against Purdue. He got into the game, changed the tempo for a couple plays, but really couldn't sustain that, and the Ohio State defense just looked dominant today. So that's something I take away from this Ohio State game as, okay, and Joe Klatt kept making this point too, if they can put all this stuff together, if they can successfully be able to throw and run the ball with balance on offense, and that secondary that looked pretty good in coverage plays
like that, not necessarily lights out, but good enough, this Ohio State team could easily beat Michigan, and they could go on to win the Big Ten championship. And honestly, if that happens, I'd say Ohio State does control their own destiny. Because at that point, who's going to get in over Ohio State if, let's say, all the top three even went out and the Big 12 champion even, though you're going to put the Big 12 champion over Ohio State, you just won the Big 10 against Michigan or Washington State. If Washington State went out, I don't think so.
So consider that if we've got an Alabama, Clemson, Notre Dame 1, 2, 3, and again, I would expect that one of them is going to slip up. But let's say we get chalk prevails for those three teams. So, yes, we've got a Washington State, Oklahoma, Ohio State gridlock at 12-1. That Purdue game could be weighed heavily by this committee.
Yeah, that's true. But I will say this, and granted they did this last year, but this is a little bit different than last year because Ohio State did have that loss to Oklahoma, and they had that second loss, so they were a two-loss team going up against a one-loss team. Versus this year, they would be one loss down the board, but Ohio State would have a better resume. I'm assuming Penn State's going to win out. They got their toughest test remaining after Michigan out of the way, so I'm assuming they're going to be 9-3. They're probably going to be ranked. Michigan State doesn't have much of a test left. They're probably going to be ranked. And then Michigan, of course, is going to be ranked more likely in the top 10 if Ohio State were to beat them. So Ohio State would have 3 top 25 wins, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that would be more than any of those other three teams. It's definitely more than what Washington State would have. And I'm not positive on Oklahoma or West Virginia. You skipped over West Virginia. They're playing some good football right now.
Sure, we're assuming Oklahoma, but West Virginia is right there as well. It's basically the same resume, or will be once they finish it out. Oklahoma beat FAU and Army and UCLA in the non-conference, and West Virginia unfortunately didn't get to play North Carolina State. So there's a slight difference there, but not much of anything significant. Oklahoma, if they run the table, and I'll use them as an example over West Virginia, but it could be either one. They will have beaten West Virginia twice, so that's 2 ranked wins. They did beat Iowa State, who is currently ranked, and won again today.
Iowa State, I hate to cut you off, but what if Iowa State went out, and if Oklahoma beats West Virginia, they're going to play Iowa State again in the conference championship, so they wouldn't have that 2 wins against West Virginia.
That's a good call. That's a good call on your part. So this is where we sometimes lose a little perception at times because of the overall record, which doesn't mean anything versus the conference record. So right now in the Big 12, yes, we still have Iowa State at sitting at 5-2. So if they win the last 2, they finish at 7-2. They would have the tiebreaker because they won the head-to-head against West Virginia, who would be 7-2. So Iowa State not getting a whole lot of talk right now. And the Cyclones, the last 2 weeks, have 2 very winnable games against the likes of Kansas State. And who's their last game against? Oh, they've got a makeup game. Okay. That's right. They've got the makeup game that doesn't matter out of conference. Yeah, before that, they go to Texas next week.
Okay.
So I will be the guy that's always rooting for chaos, will be rooting to the hilt that Iowa State goes to Texas and wins.
Well, the same scenario is also there for Texas, too. Let's say Texas, on the other hand, went out. West Virginia beats Oklahoma. It would be West Virginia-Texas rematch in the Big 12 championship. So nothing's settled in the Big 12 for sure in terms of championship matchups. There are 4 teams who could easily get to the championship.
Absolutely right, and I'm usually take some pride in breaking these things down, but that based on today's results, I hadn't really thought of that, processed that specifically today. But you know what the deal is. You watch the national shows, I'm sure, or catch some of the rhetoric. All anybody's talking about is Oklahoma and West Virginia playing 2 consecutive weeks.
Yeah, that's all anyone's going to talk about, and I'm playing these scenarios that could very likely happen. and it really just depends on what happens to that Oklahoma-West Virginia game. Because the winner of that, to me, the winner of the Iowa State-Texas game is going to win their second game. So if, Texas wins and Oklahoma wins, well, Texas is still going to get left out. West Virginia is going to go ahead and get that tiebreaker over Texas. So that wouldn't matter. They would rematch. But my main point with this is I've been backtracking a lot and talking different things. I think that I'm going to have a harder time putting Oklahoma above Ohio State than West Virginia over Ohio State, because how Oklahoma's played lately on defense today, they need a missed section point really to win that game, and a two-point conversion call that I didn't personally like because they only sent one wide receiver for their best receiver, but one receiver on a route on that two-point conversion. And they also struggled in allowing, I believe it was, I can't remember how many points they allowed to Texas Tech, but it was quite a bit of points in that game. So how bad Oklahoma's defense is versus Ohio State against a pretty pedestrian offense, but looking a lot better, only allowing 6 points and no touchdowns today. And me coming from the mindset defenses win championships, I would just say the better defense out of the two is West Virginia. So if West Virginia were to win, I think they would have the better argument than Oklahoma.
So Bash Gaming,
over Ohio State.
Bash Gaming, in our conversations, I've always respected your opinion. And so, I'm only bringing up alternatives and playing the devil's advocate. That Oklahoma, if they do win out and they face Texas in the Big 12 championship game and they win that game, the committee is going to give them a lot of credit for avenging a loss that was at the wire on a last-second field goal, 48-45, versus Ohio State, again, having a loss that Purdue lost another game today. They're most likely going to finish, 7-5, 6-6? And Ohio State's going to have that hanging around their neck. So I think another point that you're making here and bringing up all these scenarios is that there's an assumption that we're going to have 2 one-loss teams playing in the Big 12 championship game, and that's not necessarily the case. We could have a 2 or 3 loss overall, 2 or 3 loss team that's going to be a big challenge for Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. People get caught up in the rankings, and the rankings don't determine the conference races. And they look at the rankings and think that the teams with the highest rankings are going to play in conference championship games, and that's not always the case.
Yeah, I will say this, though, just based off of what they did last year with the committee. Remember, Georgia avenged their loss against Auburn in the SEC championship, but yet wasn't ranked above Clemson, who lost to a 4-8 Syracuse team. So that's just basing me off of what the committee did last year. I don't know how relevant that will be. It may be because, also they did punish Ohio State for losing by 31 to Iowa. This time they would be losing against an average Purdue team by 29 points.
The only difference in this scenario, well, there's a lot of differences, but the main difference in this scenario that plays to your argument is that we're not comparing a one-loss non-division winner like Alabama to a 2-loss conference champion. We're just comparing 1-loss conference champions.
Yeah, that is true. And the last thing I'm going to say is that I'm going to go. The committee sends the best in order of the rankings. The committee tends to send the teams who are playing their best football as of late in there when they have a debate. And, I guess it would be hard to debate Oklahoma and Ohio State in that case if they both were to have impressive wins against West Virginia and, let's say, Texas against Texas. Let's go ahead for the sake of argument and say that as well. Then you would be winning 2 really good games. And I'm going to say Northwestern will probably be ranked when Ohio State plays them. If this scenario happens, Ohio State would also get 2 top 25 wins. So, I don't know. It's just the season's not over is my big point, and it just a little bit bugs me that people are acting like the season's over. So, I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Bash Gaming.
See you later.
I appreciate it. So some good points made there by Bash Gaming. I think it can also be noted that Ohio State had the advantage of taking on a Wisconsin team last year that was 12-0. So they gained a top 5 win that still didn't help them get into the playoffs. I'm sure it was considered, but it didn't get them into the playoffs. And then the other point I was going to make to Bash Gaming is that the losses seem to count a whole lot more in comparing Alabama and Ohio State last year than the wins did. So he was running through the quality of Ohio State's wins and what they will be if they go on and beat Michigan and Northwestern. But they had the better wins than Alabama last year, and it didn't matter. They had a slew of top 10 and top 15 wins against the likes of Michigan State, Penn State, Wisconsin, and somebody else in there. All right, folks, I think we've done plenty of work here, unless somebody else wants to call me. I am going to wrap up the weekend. Typically, I've done that for the last few weeks on a Sunday morning wrap-up show at SD1 Sports at 11 a.m. Eastern time. I'm going to be spending some time with my daughter tomorrow, so therefore I'm not going to be able to fulfill that obligation. But what we're going to do is I'm going to try to break down this college football playoff scenario and all these conference races as much as I possibly can over the next few days. And, of course, have my top 25 that actually makes sense out tomorrow as well. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
It's the Beast.
The Beast. How are you?
Yeah, man. How are you? I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Enjoy talking college football.
Just got back from the UAB game. We clinched the division. We're going to the conference championship.
This is tremendous. All right. Let me pull up the box score here while you give me a rundown on what happened.
It was a back-and-forth battle the whole game. Came down to the wire, went to overtime. We won in overtime. They kicked the field goal and we ended up winning on a 17-yard rushing touchdown, 26-23.
So I noticed that you were close to a 14-point favorite in the game. I did see the line this morning when I was reviewing the line. So this turned out to be quite the game, and it was close throughout. I don't see that anyone really made a comeback. It was just you were down 10-0, but after 13-0. But then after that, it was pretty close throughout the game.
It was pretty good game, pretty good defensive game.
I see that you had to play your backup quarterback again.
Yeah, our starter's probably not going to play the rest of the year. Probably.
Okay.
I don't know.
So
maybe he'll be ready for the Texas A&M game. I don't know.
So I'm going to say, Beast, that statistically, it doesn't appear as though he played a very good game with the 3 interceptions and only 14 of 27.
He did not play, but 2 of those interceptions were probably one was his fault and one was not. And then the 3rd interception, the guy just fell down and then got picked off.
So I'm going to watch the Conference USA Championship game, as I always do, and then I will watch all the bowl games, or as many as I can possibly get to. So to kind of prep me going into these games, give me 2 to 3 players on offense and defense that I need to look out for that are impressive. Hey, Beast, you still with us? Oh, hey, Beast, how are you?
Sorry, I was signal for a second.
Oh, that's okay. So my question was, I mentioned that I'm going to watch the Conference USA Championship game, as I always do, and I watch as many bowl games as I possibly can. So what 2 or 3 players, let's say on offense and defense, do I need to look out for that I should be keeping an eye on going into these games?
On offense, Spencer Brown, he's probably the best running back we've ever had.
Wow. Okay.
Colin Lee Caesar is a good receiver, and that's a tough one. That's probably our two best offensive players.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Xavier Herbosi. He's our really good other receiver.
Yeah.
Hard name to say. Defense, probably Diggs. His brother plays at Alabama, so
okay, sure.
In the NFL.
Yep.
Our defense line will probably be our best bet because we had a lot of sacks tonight and a lot of our quarterback was really mobile, but we managed to get him a lot. So probably our defensive line will probably be our best bet.
You've got a kid here, Trey Crawford, that had 3 sacks tonight.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Okay, 7 sacks, 13 tackles for loss. So a nice defensive game.
Special teams, we had another block punt, which was good. I think we got 3 this year. And we had one. We went 1 for 2 on field goals. It was a 54-yard field goal that he missed, and then almost got returned for a touchdown. Anyway, he returned it, I think, to the UAB 38. But they got called back. So let's see what else. I don't know. If we'll probably end up playing Middle Tennessee for the conference. We'll have to play them back to back. If we win, they'll come to us. If we lose, we'll probably have to go to them again. So I think it'll be a good conference game.
So you mentioned some of the special teams plays that USM made, and that obviously kept them in the game. For them to score 23 points and take you guys to overtime, they only had 165 yards of total offense in this game. They basically ran for nothing. They ran for 5 yards. Obviously, that includes sacks, but still.
Yeah, our rush defense is pretty good. Our passing defense is not that great, but I think we can improve.
Okay. Good stuff. So yeah, Southern Miss falls to 4-6, and you guys are now 9-1, 7-0 in Conference USA.
And we are 12-0 since returning from the 2-year loss. We haven't lost a game in Legion Field since 2014.
That's great. That is great, Beast.
Yeah, so are you gonna do a preview prediction on the Texas A&M game this week? That's coming up week.
You know, Beast, for you, I will do that. Let me mark that down so it doesn't slip my mind, because a lot of things slip my mind because I've got all sorts of stuff going on here. So I don't want this to get past me. But you've been great about calling in with the UAB updates, and I appreciate it. And I really enjoy, since I'm locked in on the Power 5, and I love Group of 5 football. I love Conference USA. I love watching the bowl games and the conference championship games once we get to that point, but there's just too much football going on to watch everybody, that I love the updates, and I'll watch the highlights tonight. I'll look at the not just the touchdowns, but the extended highlights of this game, and we'll give you a UAB Texas A&M preview. So, all right, Beast, you just have to promise that you're going to get a few people to watch this thing.
Texas A&M, I will.
And let's see, I'll get it out by Thursday.
Yes, sir.
All right.
All right.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the call. Glad you enjoyed the game, and congratulations to the Blazers.
All right, thank you. Go Blazers. Have a good weekend.
You too. That was Beast, keeping us updated on the UAB Blazers. They're 9-1. They're 7-0 in the conference. They lost early to Coastal Carolina, and they have been on a roll. And despite a few mishaps in special teams that took this game into overtime, they held Southern Miss to 160 yards of total offense. They had 13 tackles for loss. If you don't keep track of that kind of stuff, that is a high number. And 7 sacks in this game. Spencer Brown ran for 75 yards. Their quarterback now, Tyler Johnson, didn't have much of a game with 3 interceptions and only hit on 14 of 27. But he's a running quarterback as well. And we'll keep an eye on UAB. And I've got to keep this note in front of me. I got to put it somewhere where I don't forget to do the – I'll put a note maybe in my Gmail that I don't forget to do the UAB Texas A&M preview. All right. I'm going to check on the live chat one more time, and then I'm going to take in the rest of the USC-Cal game and actually – eat for the first time today. So my eating habits, that's probably a whole other subject if anybody would care to listen. But let's go to the live chat. Let's not dive into that. All right. G White 713. I'm seeing him all over the place, and this is for the first time that I've ever seen him in the chat. So appreciate you jumping on board. I think at one point I saw who you root for. I don't know who that is, though. La Potencia. Mark, what are your thoughts on Boise State? Oh, man. So I saw Syracuse play Louisville last night. I did an analysis video on that. Then I got tied up with some other things, both with the business and without the business. And I DVR'd Boise State and Fresno State last night, and I watched some of it. I was impressed that Boise State was in a position which they almost let that game slip away. They were down 17-3. They were showing me little on offense, and they dedicated themselves in the first couple drives of the second half to the ground game with Madison running the football, and I thought that was very impressive. They put the game in the hands of their offensive line, and they really pounded the ball down the field. Then they had that game-clinching touchdown that won at 24-17 about midway through the fourth quarter. Rippon threw the ball on the line to the wideout. I don't know who it was, but he beat the DB on the post route, and it was pretty impressive. So that's my real quick take on Boise State football, based on not seeing a whole lot of the Broncos this season. Down through the years, I've seen a whole bunch of Boise State football. I usually check in on all the big games, and they play a non-conference game every season. And, of course, that was what I thought was going to be a win in Stillwater, and they got blitzed by the Cowboys. They've lost a game in conference play, but it appears as though I believe they're going to have a chance, most likely, to rematch Fresno State for the conference championship. I know they have one loss in conference, 2 overall. Let's see this. Boise State. I just want to make sure I've got the conference standings correct. Yeah, I do. They're 5-1. Utah State 6-0. I believe they play. And Fresno State has wrapped up the other division. And so it's all going to come down to, of course, the Utah State game. And that game is in Idaho, in Boise. So the Broncos taking on Utah State. Huge game, the final game of the regular season. I think Boise State's one of the 30 or 35 best teams in the country. I think they're very capable. They'll be a tough out for any Power 5 team in a bowl game. And the way this slots, they'll probably take another trip to the Las Vegas Bowl, I would guess. I don't know how it sets up right now. We could look at some bowl projections, and that's another thing I could work on, of course. That's another thing I could add to the list, is to do bowl projections, but that takes a whole lot of work. If you want to do it right, I could kind of cheat and look at other people's bowl projections and then just kind of, and I know that goes on all over the place. I tend to not take my work that way. I kind of go the granular route and build it up all myself and try to not rely on anybody else's findings, just the straight stats and what I perceive and what I've watched and what I can find in regards to statistics and scores and where we stand on all that. Bowl projections. Of course, these are not going to include what happened today, so they're going to be a little bit off. But concerning Boise State, they should be accurate. So we'll go to CBS Sports. And again, I'm considering what's happened in past years of the Mountain Conference champion going to the Mountain West Conference champion going to the Las Vegas Bowl. So there you go. That's exactly what I projected. December 16th, which is one of the very first bowl games of the season. It's on the first day of bowl play, that Saturday, where they load us up with 5 games right out of the gate. There's a projection of USC and Boise State. Would love to watch that game. So Boise State is sitting at 8-2. They've got a winnable game, a game in which they're going to be very much the huge favorite against New Mexico State next week, New Mexico. And then they play Utah State at home to go to the conference championship game, because that would tie them with Utah State. They'd own the tiebreaker head-to-head and would have a rematch with Fresno State, which, of course, was the Mountain West Championship game last year. All right, folks, anything else? Football Fanatic 28. Mike Gundy's overrated. Humble Day, what do you think of Dexter Williams' potential for the pros? Oh, I think it's outstanding. I think he's a better back than Josh Adams, who's currently playing in the pros and getting some carries. So Dexter Williams is known as a home run back, so you immediately think of explosive, one step and go, can take it to the house, but he's a grinder too. He's a big, powerful guy. So I think he's going to play quite a bit in the pros. USC Gamecock fan, Dino Babers, I'm not sold on him. How does his recruiting look? It looks much better than it did years ago, in which Syracuse was ranking in the 70s in the recruiting rankings, and he's got them in the households of places in which they would not have had a chance years ago. But it's not going to be a top 25 class at Syracuse, but in the top 40 range. Drew Chrisman for Heisman. Certainly saved Ohio State on this day. The SEC needs Houston. And again, we've got James Scott. I hope I never missed that pronunciation, but that's what it looks like to me, chiming in with a number of knowledgeable comments as usual. Utah State is Bash Gaming must be his selection for the Mountain West Championship with Matt Wells, who we have, and I think this probably predates any of you watching Mark Rogers TV, but actually Matt Wells, the head coach at Utah State, has been our guest here 3 times at Mark Rogers TV. I'll have to reach out to him. That was something I attempted to do when I first established this channel, was to have college football coaches come on. And it was a whole lot of work, as you can imagine. You got to write the form letter, and then only about 10% of them are responded to. And then you go back and forth with times and explaining what you do and what questions you're going to ask. And you're not in communication directly with the head coach. You're talking to the sports information director. And then you try to figure out a time. And of course, they have very narrow pockets of time in which they are available. So I gave up on that. But I have had Gary Anderson, the head coach at Oregon State, on, Matt Wells at Utah State on 3 times, Sonny Dykes, who was at Cal at the time, now is at Louisiana Tech. I've had him on, I think, 3 times. Also head coaches at Air Force, Troy Calhoun, Ball State, Pete Lambeau, Coach Blankenship at Tulsa, the former head coach there, and a few others that I can't remember. South Alabama, their former head coach, Joey Jones. So that would be great. I thought that would distinguish the channel to have actual head coaches come on. And I got close to reeling in Mississippi State, Dan Mullen at the time, Purdue with Danny Hope at the time, Paul Christ when he was at Pitt, but it didn't quite happen. Hey guys, I appreciate all the support. I had a conversation with somebody last night who's a viewer, and they were just beyond gracious in communicating their level of support and what they feel I deliver to you. I'm not perfect. I'm flawed in my delivery and in my facts, but I do my very best to be on point, logical, calculated, but I hope we have fun as well. And we'll try to have a little bit more fun in the future and try to build this channel in what I would like it to be to serve you, the college football fan, the smart, hardcore college football fan. So I'm going to work on my top 25, going to work on a number of these scenarios coming up in the college football playoff race and also the various conference races with only Northwestern and Clemson. Who would have guessed that? Northwestern and Clemson are the only 2 teams outside the SEC that have locked up division championships. So we appreciate it. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, heading toward week 13. Week 12. We'll see you guys next time.